Welcome back to Harbor. Unbowed by criticism, President Donald Trump proudly defended his racist tweets, telling 4 Democratic congresswomen of color that they can leave the country.
If you're not happy here, then you can leave. That's what I say all the time. If you're not happy in the U.S., if you're complaining all the time, very simply, you can leave. You're not happy, you can leave. Well, they're very unhappy. I'm watching them. All they do is complain. So all I'm saying is, if they want to leave, they can leave. This isn't what our country is about. Nevertheless, they're free to leave if they want.
Well, his comments were greeted with cheers from supporters who were gathered at the White House for a manufacturing event. Trump offered no knowledge of, by the way, where those women should go to. And later this afternoon, U.S. Congresswoman Omar responded to those remarks. Let's listen to her.
You might have noticed how when he said, go back to where you came from, there was an uproar through all of our communities, because every single person who's brown and black at some point in their life in this country heard that.
For more, I'm joined by U.S. Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, Democrat from Illinois. How did you hear the president? What did you make of it emotionally when you heard the president talking about people like yourself? Go home where you came from.
You know, that used to be kind of a taunt in a schoolyard, or maybe in a fit of road rage in traffic. To now see it elevated to the president's Twitter feed is shocking. But that being said, it is completely antithetical to what the vast majority of Americans believe in. You know, President Ronald Reagan said it best. You know, you can go to live in France, you can't be a Frenchman. You can go to Germany and live there, you can't be a German. But you can come from any corner of the world to America, and you can be an American. And that's who we are as a country.
You just said that very well. That's what Barack Obama said in that wonderful 2004 speech in Boston, where he said, only in this country is my story possible. People should be thrilled by that and not resist it. The fact that this is a country of ideas and values, not of ethnicity. What do you think he's going to achieve by this? I think it may, I hate to say this, but I don't hate to say it. I'm skeptical of my own thinking here. I think he really stepped in it, because I thought he would run on citizenship against illegal immigrants. But here he's running on pure ethnicity, not even citizenship, which would be a politically tactical, smart thing to do, run on citizenship. But here he's making fun of 4 citizens.
That's right. There's so many people in this country who are just one generation away from having immigrated. 30% of my district was born in another country, and they came here from places like Poland and Ireland and Germany, as well as Mexico and India and other places in the world. And I can tell you almost with 100% certainty that when they saw those remarks, they would have been shocked and would have condemned them.
You know, just a few days ago, hardly hours ago, this president looked like he had a great opportunity to help drive a wedge in the Democratic caucus in the House, because Ayanna Pressley had made those tough remarks about race and identity. And, of course, there was a big fight going on in the New York Times between Nancy Pelosi and the squad, those 4 young women. And now your whole caucus is united against Trump and what he's been saying.
Right. We recognize the common opposition here. We are completely united against bigotry and prejudice and intolerance and hatred and racism in all its forms. And his tweets embodied all of those things, Chris. It reminded us of why we came here and what the stakes are in 2020.
Is he un-American?
I think his tweets were un-American. I think they were racist and race-baiting, and I think most people see them for what they are. One thing I just want to say, this is part and parcel of his trying to create a culture of fear and cruelty towards immigrants and foreigners. This weekend on Sunday, I marched through the Little Village neighborhood of Chicago, which is the epicenter of the Mexican-American area of Chicago, to distribute flyers, Know Your Rights flyers, because of the threatened immigration raids. Unfortunately, there was no one to hand these flyers out to. Chris. Most people were shuttered inside, fearing that if they were to go out, they would basically be caught up in an ice trap. And so now with these tweets, with the threatened immigration raids, with what we see on the border, I think this is completely a pattern of un-American activity at the highest levels of government.
And here you are, an American speaking out in the U.S. Capitol. I'm so proud. Thank you. U.S. Congressman Krista Morty of Illinois. Up next, can you speak up? Only a handful of rebukes coming from Republicans. Only a few. Lawmakers are figuring out that it's either, well, they're going to speak against Trump or keep their jobs. They are so scared. Well, you can't be both courageous and safe with this guy. You're watching Hardball. Welcome back to Hardball. Republicans were largely silent this weekend, as I said, after Trump's tweet telling 4 Democratic congressmen to go back where they came from. And though a very few came out strongly today to condemn the president's language, some directly calling his tweets racist, others provided tepid criticism while simultaneously attacking the Democratic women he went after. Let's watch.
A number of these new members of Congress have views that are not consistent with my experience and not consistent with building a strong America.
The president failed badly this weekend and continues to do so today.
Do you think that his tweets were racist towards those congresswomen?
What was tweeted was destructive, was demeaning, was disunifying, and frankly was very wrong.
We all know that AOC and this crowd are a bunch of communists. They hate Israel. They hate our own country. They're anti-Semitic. They're anti-America. Don't get down. Aim higher. We don't need to know anything about them personally. Talk about their policies.
Senator. Well, others defended the president's own comments.
Do you find the president's tweets racist, and what do you make of white nationalists praising those tweets?
I don't find them racist. And clearly, it's not a racist comment. He could have meant go back to the district they came from.
I think the president believes that the more he can get the country to look at the so-called squad, the more he can get them to realize how radical they are and how fundamentally anti-American their views are. In the long run, the better off he is.
I don't think the former speaker believes what he just said there. I don't think he's a lot smarter than that. I'm joined now by former Florida Congressman, Republican Congressman, no longer Republican, formerly known as a Republican, David Jolly, and Susan Page, USA Today, Washington Bureau. What do you make of your party and why the ex-party you're in, why they are such toadies? I do not understand Lindsey Graham. Is he that worried about his primary that he has to do this stuff?
Yeah, he's getting worse, and he's in cycle. But, Chris, I find myself, and I think a lot of Americans do, 24 hours into this, you're kind of moving from outrage to heartbreak. You're really wrestling with the fact that the President of the United States engaged in this racist narrative, this racist dialogue, and then doubled down today. I think for Republicans, we know they're acting through enlightened self-interest, right? Their own reelection, Lindsey Graham's being a perfect example. I think the only way to get to them is for them to understand that through their own enlightened self-interest, their legacy is on the line. Yeah. In their silence, they normalize Donald Trump. And we haven't talked about that. We've talked about the fact that Donald Trump gives permission to these racist elements that were already out there, right? Republican elected officials on Capitol Hill, in their silence, are giving Donald Trump permission. This is their legacy. And they need to understand in their own self-interest, this is what they'll be remembered for. They will be remembered for normalizing racism in the national political dialogue in 2019. This is on them, just as much as it's on Donald Trump. This is on the likes of Lindsey Graham and Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell. Every single Republican up there, Kevin McCarthy, who refuses to condemn racism for racism, this is their legacy more than it is Donald Trump.
It's pretty much what Dave said. That's pretty much what they did during the birther period. They didn't stand up against him.
And in some contrast to the Charlottesville comments, which were almost exactly 2 years ago, that got a bigger outcry.
Somebody got killed there.
Somebody got killed there. But also, I think it was before it was so clear that Trump had taken over the Republican Party, and it was very dangerous for Republicans to define him. You did have a couple, though. Joni Ernst said the comments were racist. Pat Toomey came up with a pretty strong statement saying that the 4 congresswomen were as American as he was.
Well, that's good for him.
Were the
that's a reasonable. Pennsylvania's an interesting state to watch because it's not going to buy into that racism. But what do you think? You know how the Hill works. You know how the Hill works. You've got a bunch of staff people around you, usually a smart chief of staff, a smart press person, or they wouldn't be there. And you sit around and you sort of decide these things over an hour or so. And they decided deliberately not to challenge Trump. It wasn't like an impulsive thing. How do you explain that? Calculation. The calculation of a Congress political animal is back the president on his worst.
In the end, there's only one person in each congressional office who holds the public trust. It's the elected official whose name is on the ballot. This is their leadership moment. And their failure in making a decision to step out, they see the politics. Look, the Republican Party is a party of populism right now. And the reality is populism is largely the politics of white middle-class grievance. This plays to that very well. The president's pivot today, he pivoted from yesterday saying, Americans of color need to go back home, to today saying love it or leave it. Chris, that's a very powerful message that will work for the president and for a lot of the Republican constituencies.
In the burbs?
Yeah, love it or leave it? Sure. It absolutely will.
I think Republicans... I agree with you. I mean, when you look at the core supporters for President Trump, I think they are not deterred by comments like that. But when you look at the voters who abandoned Republicans in 2018, they were college-educated suburbanites who I think might well be distressed by him.
Nobody says leave it or love it or leave it to some ticked-off white guy. Nobody ever says that.
No, you go through the...
I never heard that used. Some guy from West Virginia, somebody from Western Pennsylvania who's angry about the liberal nature of the big cities and everything. You don't say, well, get out of here.
No, you know the constituency that's going to respond to this, and frankly, it is populist throughout the Electoral College key swing states. It's the same constituency that responded to Toby Keith after 9/11 when he wrote that song, "We'll Put a Boot in Your Ass." It speaks to the spirit of nativism that we are strong, and if you disagree with it, then get out.
Do you believe the guy or woman on the commuter train in Connecticut or Philadelphia coming home from work in the afternoon is willing to engage in this kind of racist talk? Do you?
And you know, economic grievance is one thing.
On the train with other people around.
Economic grievance in this country, but this is really racial grievance. This is really directed at America's diversity, and I think that is different and more dangerous. More dangerous for Trump. More dangerous for the Republicans.
There's 96 people. I just counted today. I went through the census, the one we have. 40-some million African Americans, 56-some Hispanic Americans from different backgrounds. That's almost 100 million people in this country. It's not some marginalist little group living in Detroit somewhere. It's a big part of the country, and they all heard that today.
And it's not as though the racial diversity of America is going to be reversed. It's good. We're going to become more diverse than we are before. So this is a very short-term strategy.
But they're not turning out for Donald Trump.
I don't think he got above 40 today with the case for his stuff today. Anyway, the Fox and Friends host reacted to the president's tweet on Sunday morning by laughing and saying he made an important point. Talk about toadyism. Let's watch.
This tweet that you're just seeing now is clearly going to get, I think, a lot of discussion.
Someone's feeling very comedic today.
One thing I was at.
I think President Trump is making an important point, and he's drawing attention to that and saying, if you don't like what this country stands for, you're not going to change it and take away all these things that Americans value so much. Like, if you don't like it, leave and go set up camp somewhere else, but you're not going to destroy what we have fought so hard and so long to value.
It doesn't ring true to me. You think it does, for those people watching Fox?
Understand, I think politically it will work with the only constituency Donald Trump has left. But what I see right there is voices of leadership giving permission to racism in the United States.
Thank you. Former U.S. Congressman, formerly known as, well, he's always going to be a congressman. That's a good title. But not always a Republican. David Jolly, thank you, sir. And thank you, one of the greats. Susan Page, thank you. Up next, Trump trades in his racial dog whistle for a bullhorn, mapping out Trump's long, ugly history of using divisive language and being rewarded for it politically. That's what we're going to go through his rap sheet. You're watching Hardball. Welcome back to Hardball. The president's attack on 4 Democrats of color have elicited numerous charges of racism. And while other politicians have used racist dog whistles in recent American history, Trump's behavior is often out in the open. Let's take a look.
Trump comes along and said, birth certificate. He gave a birth certificate. Whether or not that was a real certificate, because a lot of people question it, I certainly question it. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. He's a Mexican. We're building a wall between here and Mexico. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Look at my African American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest?
I don't know anything about David Duke, okay? I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists. You wouldn't want me to condemn a group that I know nothing about.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Well, the president's latest remarks have drawn new scrutiny to his record on race, a record that predates his political career by over 40 years. In fact, the very first time Trump's name ever appeared in the New York Times, it was all about race. And that's coming up next. You're watching it, Hardball. Welcome back to Hardball. President Trump has repeatedly denied charges of racism throughout his entire public career. Yet the record shows that time and time again, Donald Trump, has taken actions that suggest otherwise. In fact, the first time Trump's name ever appeared, as I said, in the New York Times, was when the Justice Department accused his company of discriminating against African Americans in 1973. Well, years later, he placed a full-page advertisement in that same New York Times calling for 5 black teenagers to be put to death for a crime that DNA evidence later showed they did not commit. And as President Trump has made an ugly reference to describe African countries, among others. We know what that word is. I'm joined right now by Anita Kumar, White House correspondent for Politico, and David K. Johnson, a columnist and author of The Making of Donald Trump. David, tell us about Trump and his... What do you think? Is he the kind of guy in a back room with other right-wing business guys that would make slurs about people of color? Is he that kind of guy?
That's not Donald's style. Donald's actions are what matter here. He once removed a blackjack dealer because he thought it would curry favor with his biggest gambler, Bob LaBuddy. He's been found in proceedings to have discriminated in his casino business against blacks, women, Asians, Puerto Ricans. He has a long history of actions, and I think we should be paying attention to his actions. And his actions are flat out racist.
I heard about his accountant one time. He didn't want an African-American accountant.
Right. He said, I only want short guys wearing yarmulkes handling my money, not black guys. And this is Donald's actions, and that's what should matter to us. And his tweets are doing nothing but dividing this country. They're also distracting us from other issues, which, of course, is one of Donald's great skills, distracting us.
What do you think, Anita, when you look at him? You know, people of color told me a racist is someone who speaks racially, someone who uses it negatively against people to hold them back. It doesn't matter what's in their heart or if it even matters because they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what he's doing is it's this us against them. That's his whole, that's been what he's been doing.
How much us are there?
Well, I mean, he's been doing this for 2.5 years.
Is there enough us for 50% next year?
Well, there's enough us that he got elected. I mean, he, as we know politically, he hasn't expanded his base, and that's what he's looking at right now. What he's focused on is, can he just get those people to turn out, that base? He's not looking to expand it, so that is the us he's talking about.
Well, here's my question, and I'm a political guy, not an anthropologist necessarily, but it seems to me that one thing that fell off in 16 was the African-American vote in big cities like Philly. They didn't come out as much as they did, obviously, for the first African-American president, Barack Obama. That makes sense. But you got a guy out there who's looking around, looking like a racist. I would wonder if that wouldn't get the vote out, and he could lose.
Right, I agree. And also look at what happened in 2018. He already lost some people. So can he lose some more? And he is clearly banking on that this is going to work and not work. It's going to work for him, not work against him.
David, how much is this in his gut and not in his head? How much is this just his gut drive that's tribal?
Well, it's important to understand something that's very difficult for many people to accept. We have a mentally ill person in the White House, someone who is deranged. And it's awful to contemplate that. I was talking to someone in France the other day who said the reason Europeans don't like Trump, but don't have any sense of outrage about him, is they've had centuries of mad kings and crazy warlords and other rulers who were nuts, and that this is a new experience for America. And we need to recognize this, that we have somebody he's incompetent.
You believe he's a nut,
deeply
right?
Mentally troubled.
David, you think he's nutty?
Oh, yeah. He is at times delusional, and there are videos where you can see he's delusional. I mean, Donald has said, the best advisors reside in his head. He tells you he's talked to people who don't exist, and he does it all the time. He is deeply mentally ill.
Well, former Vice President Joe Biden reacted to the president's tweets today about those 4 congresswomen in an exclusive interview that will air tomorrow morning. Joe, here it goes. Here's part of it.
His tweets, for example, and these comments about these 4 congresswomen, it's racist, it's awful, it's outrageous. What's the impact on our standing?
It's not only shameful, it's incredibly damaging.
How?
Look, we've led the world by the power of our example. When presidents say they're the face of America, like it or not, they're the face of America. And the idea that Donald Trump says and does the things he does is just absolutely despicable.
Anita.
I do agree with what the former vice president just said about presidents in this country and in other countries have this huge, enormous influence. So it's not just the politics, and I know we're talking about that, but what they say carries weight in society, in America, in cities and towns. And so there is a greater weight.
You know, I'm going to bring this up at the end, David, but, you know, they once said of the great Franklin Roosevelt that his idea of being president was being Franklin Roosevelt. And that was good in that case. I'm afraid Trump's idea of being president is being Donald Trump, which is outrageous. And he hasn't changed. He hasn't elevated his game at all as president.
Yeah, Chris, that is an absolutely great insight. That's exactly what it is. And let's keep in mind here, the 4 women that Donald attacked, 3 of whom are American-born citizens. How is Donald different from them? Well, let's see. He's a first-generation American on his mother's side. 2 of his 3 wives are immigrants. Yeah. And what's the difference here? He's white, they're not. That's the only difference here.
And he thinks like that.
Oh, yes. Donald thinks in racial terms. Absolutely. And he assumes things about you based on the color of your skin, which is, you know, a long historic practice, but it is absolute nonsense. The color of your skin has nothing to do with your character.
You know, he's actually the king of identity politics if you get into it. He's white, so he talks white. I mean, that's really the identity politics definition.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with this idea that we've lost track of. People aren't talking about his own background and his wife's background. Remember back, there was his in-laws got to be citizens because of his wife, things that he opposes, but no one sort of talks about that or calls him out on that.
We all know this. Everybody watching knows what we're talking about. And everybody knows if there 10 million Heidi Klums were coming into the country, nobody would be complaining because it is race. It just is race. And we know it, and it stinks, but Trump has brought it out in the open. Maybe that's healthy. We hear what it sounds like, as ugly as it is. Thank you, Anita Kumar. You're always great to come on. David K. John, you know too much, sir, about this man. He's nutty. That's what you say. Anyway, up next, Obama, rather. I want to talk about a real president. In the tale of 2 presidencies, and we had a pretty good one right before. In fact, a very good one on this kind of issue, ethnicity and race. Much Hardball.